The blood-red sun hung like a vengeful god over Glenrio, New Mexico territory, as Victoria Dawson stumbled down the dusty Main Street, her once fine dress torn and caked with dirt, her dark hair matted with sweat and grime after fleeing from the men who had murdered her father and burned their homestead to the ground. Victoria had never imagined she would end up like this. 6 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a successful banker in Boston. Now she was alone, filthy and desperate in a town where she knew no one. Her father had dreamed of starting anew in the West after her mother's death, convinced that prosperity awaited them in the booming railroad towns. Instead, they had found only misery and betrayal. The townsfolk of Glenrio stared as she passed. Some with pity, others with disdain, a few men with hungry eyes that made her clutch the small knife hidden in the folds of her skirt. Victoria kept her gaze fixed ahead, her chin up despite the dirt on her face and the emptiness in her stomach. Pride was all she had left. The saloon loomed ahead, the frontier's promise, a garish 2-story building with peeling paint and the sounds of a poorly tuned piano spilling from its swinging doors. Victoria hesitated. A lady would never enter such an establishment, but she was no longer the lady she had been raised to be. She needed work, and saloons always needed serving girls. "You look like you could use some help, madam," a deep voice called from behind her. Victoria turned sharply, her hand instinctively moving toward her hidden knife. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the setting sun. His face was obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could see the glint of his silver spurs and the worn leather holster at his side. "I don't need charity," she replied, hating the crack in her voice that betrayed her exhaustion. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. As he stepped closer, she could see him more clearly, rugged features weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to frowning than smiling. "Didn't offer any," he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of the frontier. "But you're standing outside the only saloon in 50 miles looking like you're contemplating something you might regret." Victoria straightened her spine. "What I contemplate is my business, sir." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Name's August Yancy. Most folks just call me Yancy." He tipped his hat slightly. "And you are," she hesitated, unsure whether to give her real name, but what did it matter now? Her old life was ashes. "Victoria Dawson." He nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're new to Glenrio." "How observant of you, Mr. Yancy," she replied tartly. He didn't take offense at her tone. Instead, he gestured to the saloon. "If you're looking for work, the promise isn't the kind of place a woman like you should consider." "A woman like me?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Sir, you know nothing about what kind of woman I am." "I know enough," he said quietly. "Your hands have never scrubbed floors or washed dishes. Your accent says East Coast. Your posture says finishing school, but your eyes—" He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "Your eyes say you're running from something." Victoria felt exposed, as though this stranger had peeled away her carefully constructed defenses with just a look. "Everyone in this God-forsaken territory is running from something, Mr. Yancy." "I doubt I'm unique in that regard." Rain clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and ominous. August Yancy looked up at the sky, then back at her. "Storm's coming. You got someplace to stay?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Mrs. Sullivan runs a boarding house at the edge of town," he said, nodding in that direction. "Tell her Yancy sent you. She might have worked for you too. Honest work." "Why would you help me?" Victoria asked suspiciously. He shrugged. "Maybe I'm not as uncivilized as I look." He turned back to his horse, Untying a small leather pouch from his saddle, he handed it to her. "For Mrs. Sullivan, first week's rent." Victoria didn't take it. "I told you I don't need charity." "It's not charity if you work it off," he countered. "I've got some jobs that need doing, paperwork, correspondence. I can tell you're educated. You help me with that. We'll call it even." Before she could respond, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour. Victoria stood frozen, feeling the cool water soak through her filthy dress and plaster her hair to her face. "I'm filthy," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, looking down at her mud-caked hands and torn clothes. August Yancy's expression softened as he gazed at the broken woman before him. "Then let the rain and me wash you clean," he said, his voice barely audible over the steadily increasing rainfall. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in that strange, rain-soaked moment on the main street of Glenrio. August led his horse closer, providing some shelter with his duster. "Come on," he said, not unkindly. "Let's get you to Mrs. Sullivan's before this gets worse." Victoria hesitated, then nodded, taking the pouch of money from his outstretched hand. As they walked side by side through the rain-slicked streets, she wondered what twist of fate had brought her to this moment, walking alongside a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than she'd experienced since crossing the Mississippi. Little did she know that August Yancy had his own demons, his own past that haunted his dreams. Little did she know that the men who had murdered her father and burned their home were still searching for her, believing she had something they wanted desperately. And little did she know that the small kindness shown in the rain would set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house stood at the end of Maple Street, a 2-story building with peeling white paint and a wide front porch. Unlike most structures in Glenrio, it had an air of permanence about it, as if it had been built by someone who intended to stay. By the time they reached the porch, Victoria was soaked through, her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The rain had washed away some of the surface dirt, but she still felt unclean, contaminated by the horrors of the past weeks. August knocked firmly on the door, which swung open to reveal a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her shrewd eyes took in Victoria's bedraggled appearance without comment. "Mrs. Sullivan," August said with a respectful nod. "This is Miss Dawson. She needs a room." The older woman's gaze flicked from Victoria to August and back again. "One of yours, Yancy?" she asked bluntly. Victoria bristled at the implication, but August merely shook his head. "Just someone who could use a hand. I'll vouch for her." Mrs. Sullivan considered this for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in, then. Can't have you dripping all over my porch all night." The interior of the boarding house was modest but meticulously clean. A small parlor opened off the entrance hall, and Victoria could see a dining room beyond that. The smell of fresh bread and coffee permeated the air, making her stomach clench painfully. "Thank you for taking me in," Victoria said, trying to stand tall despite her exhaustion. Mrs. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes first, then we can talk about arrangements." She turned to August. "You can wait in the parlor, Mr. Yancy. I'll bring coffee." As Mrs. Sullivan led Victoria upstairs, August removed his hat and took a seat in the small parlor. He didn't know what had possessed him to help the young woman. Perhaps it was the determined set of her jaw, or the quiet dignity she maintained despite her circumstances. Or perhaps he recognized something of himself in her, someone who had lost everything and was struggling to rebuild from the ashes. Upstairs, Mrs. Sullivan ushered Victoria into a small but neat bedroom. "This will be yours if you decide to stay," she said, opening a wardrobe. I keep some spare clothes for emergencies. Nothing fancy, but they're clean and dry. Victoria fingered the simple cotton dress Mrs. Sullivan handed her. I can't pay much, she admitted. Not yet, anyway. Mr. Yancy seems to have taken care of that, Mrs. Sullivan replied. And he mentioned something about work, Victoria nodded. He said he has paperwork, correspondence. I can do that. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. Mrs. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Miss Porter's? Well, that's certainly a long way from Glenrio. She paused. I don't pry into people's pasts, Miss Dawson. Everyone deserves a fresh start, but I run a respectable house here. I understand, Victoria said quietly, and I assure you my character is intact. The older woman nodded, seemingly satisfied. There's a bath down the hall. I'll have hot water brought up. You get cleaned up, have something to eat, and then rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next. After Mrs. Sullivan left, Victoria sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the simple kindness being shown to her. She hadn't expected compassion in this harsh land. She hadn't expected August Yancy. Downstairs, Mrs. Sullivan returned to the parlor with coffee for August. That girl's seen trouble, she said without preamble. August nodded, accepting the cup. Seems that way. You know anything about her? No more than you do, he admitted. Found her outside the Promise, looking like she was about to make a decision she'd regret. Mrs. Sullivan's lips tightened. Beau Remington's always looking for new girls. Doesn't care much about where they come from or whether they want to be there. August's jaw clenched at the mention of Remington, the owner of the Frontier's Promise Saloon and the closest thing Glenrio had to a criminal kingpin. All the more reason to get her settled somewhere else. And your interest in this? Mrs. Sullivan asked shrewdly. August met her gaze steadily. Just trying to do right by someone who needs it. Mrs. Sullivan studied him for a long moment before nodding. Well, she can stay. I could use help around here anyway. Getting too old to be doing all the cooking and cleaning myself. Appreciate it, August said, rising to leave. I'll be by tomorrow to see about that paperwork I mentioned. As he stepped back out into the rain, August pulled his hat low over his eyes. He told himself he was just being decent, just doing what any man with a conscience would do. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. Something about Victoria Dawson had gotten under his skin. Meanwhile, Victoria sank into the first hot bath she'd had in weeks, watching as the dirt and grime, physical reminders of all she'd endured, swirled away in the water. As she scrubbed her skin until it was red and raw, she allowed herself to cry for the first time since her father's murder, silent tears mixing with the bathwater. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. And in the harsh territory of New Mexico in 1881, that was no small blessing. Morning came with the soft golden light of the desert dawn filtering through thin curtains. Victoria woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, surveying the small, clean room that now represented her new beginning. The borrowed dress from Mrs. Sullivan lay, neatly folded on a chair beside the bed. It was plain and practical, a far cry from the fashionable gowns she'd worn in Boston, but it was clean. And that was what mattered most to Victoria now. After dressing quickly, Victoria made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. The dining room held a long table where 3 men, clearly fellow boarders, were already eating. They looked up as she entered, nodding politely before returning to their meals. Mrs. Sullivan emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Good morning, Miss Dawson. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Victoria admitted. "Thank you." The older woman gestured to an empty seat. "Have some breakfast, then we'll talk about your duties here." Victoria ate ravenously, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite her hunger. The food was simple but hearty: eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, and to Victoria, it tasted better than any fine meal she'd had in Boston. As she was finishing, the front door opened, and August Yancy stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered the dining room. He looked different in the light of day, still rugged, still imposing, but somehow more approachable. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed, and his clothes, though worn, were clean. "Morning, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, nodding to the landlady before his gaze settled on Victoria. "Miss Dawson." Victoria was suddenly conscious of her plain dress and simply braided hair. "Mr. Yancy," she replied, trying to keep her voice even. Mrs. Sullivan glanced between them before gesturing to August. "Have you eaten?" "There's plenty." August shook his head. "Already did, thank you." "I'm here about that paperwork I mentioned." Mrs. Sullivan nodded. "You can use the parlor. Miss Dawson can join you once we've discussed her duties here." After breakfast, Mrs. Sullivan outlined Victoria's responsibilities, helping with meals, cleaning the common areas, and assisting with laundry. In exchange, she would receive room and board plus a small wage. "It's not much," Mrs. Sullivan said apologetically, "but it's honest work." "It's more than fair," Victoria assured her, "and I'm grateful for the opportunity." When she finally joined August in the parlor, he was sitting at a small desk, sorting through a stack of papers. He stood when she entered, a gesture of politeness that seemed at odds with his frontier demeanor. "Miss Dawson," he said, gesturing to a chair opposite the desk. "I hope you're feeling better this morning." Victoria nodded, taking the offered seat. "I am, thank you. Mrs. Sullivan has been very kind." "She's a good woman," August agreed. "Tough but fair." He returned to his chair, pushing a stack of papers toward her. "These need to be organized and copied. Letters, contracts, property deeds. I'm not much for paperwork." Victoria glanced at the documents. "You're a landowner, Mr. Yancy." "Among other things," he replied vaguely. "I have interests in several ventures around the territory." She picked up one of the contracts, scanning it quickly. "This is a mining claim." August nodded. "Silver mostly, some copper." Victoria looked at him with new interest. "You're a businessman then, not just a—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish without causing offense. "Not just a cowboy," he suggested, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "The West is changing, Miss Dawson. Smart men change with it." Victoria began organizing the papers, her trained mind quickly sorting them into logical categories. "And are you a smart man, Mr. Yancy?" "Smart enough to know I need help with this," he replied, gesturing to the paperwork. "And to recognize an educated woman when I see one." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Victoria sorting and organizing while August occasionally explained the context of certain documents. She was impressed by the scope of his business interests: mining claims, cattle operations, investments in the expanding railroad, and land purchases that suggested he was anticipating the territory's continued growth. "You've built quite an empire," she remarked, looking up from a particularly detailed contract. August shrugged. "Just trying to secure my future. The frontier won't be wild forever." "Is that what brought you out here? The opportunity?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Partly," he finally said. "But mostly I came because there was nothing left for me back east." Victoria understood that feeling all too well. "We have that in common, it seems." Their eyes met across the desk, and that strange connection she'd felt in the rain returned, stronger now. There was something about August Yancy that called to her, perhaps the quiet strength he exuded, or the way his eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses. The moment was broken by Mrs. Sullivan entering with coffee. "How's it coming along?" she asked. setting down the tray. "Miss Dawson is proving quite capable," August replied, accepting a cup with a nod of thanks. Mrs. Sullivan smiled approvingly. "Thought she might be. Girl with her education won't be stuck doing laundry forever, that's certain." After Mrs. Sullivan left, Victoria took a sip of coffee, gathering her courage. "Mr. Yancy, may I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why did you really help me yesterday? The truth, please." August set down his coffee cup, considering her question. "The truth is, I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "Something about you reminded me of someone who didn't get the help they needed when it mattered." Victoria sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had the right to their secrets. God knew she had her own. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful," she said softly. "Not many would have bothered with a stranger." August's expression darkened slightly. "This territory can be cruel to those without protection, especially women. Men like Beau Remington prey on desperation." He paused. "Which reminds me, it's probably best if you stay clear of the Promise and the men who frequent it. Remington doesn't take kindly to losing potential employees." Victoria's stomach tightened at his implication. "I'll keep that in mind." As they returned to work, Victoria couldn't help wondering about August Yancy. He was clearly educated himself, despite his frontier mannerisms. He had business acumen that suggested formal training. And there was pain in his eyes when he spoke of the past, the kind of pain she recognized, because she carried it herself. For the first time since fleeing the burning remains of her father's homestead, Victoria felt something other than fear and despair. It wasn't quite hope, she wasn't ready for that yet, but perhaps it was the first step toward it. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings and evenings were spent helping Mrs. Sullivan with the boarding house, while afternoons were dedicated to August's paperwork. Victoria found herself looking forward to those quiet hours in the parlor, where conversation flowed easily between discussions of business matters and more personal topics. She learned that August had been in the New Mexico territory for 7 years, that he had fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War despite being only 17 at the time, and that he had a deep appreciation for literature, a fact that delighted her. "Whitman?" she asked, surprised when he quoted Song of Myself during a discussion about the territory's future. "I wouldn't have taken you for a poetry man, Mr. Yancy." He smiled, one of his rare, genuine smiles that transformed his face. "There's a lot about me that might surprise you, Miss Dawson." In turn, she shared carefully edited stories of her life in Boston, her education, her love of music. She spoke of her mother's death from influenza years earlier, but avoided any mention of her father or the circumstances that had brought her to Glenrio. If August noticed these gaps in her narrative, he didn't comment on them. A week passed, then 2. Victoria's skin lost its pallor, gaining color from brief walks in the New Mexico sun. The haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something calmer, more settled. Mrs. Sullivan commented on the change one evening as they prepared dinner. "You're looking more like a living person and less like a ghost," the older woman remarked, handing Victoria a bowl of potatoes to mash. "Suits you better." Victoria smiled. "I feel more alive than I have in some time." Mrs. Sullivan glanced toward the parlor, where August could be seen through the doorway, reading a newspaper. "Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain businessman who's taken to visiting almost daily, would it?" Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Yancy has been kind, that's all." Mrs. Sullivan hummed noncommittally. "In all the years I've known August Yancy, kind isn't a word I'd have used for him. Honest, yes, fair, certainly, but he keeps to himself, that one, always has." She paused, studying Victoria's face. "Until now, it seems." Victoria didn't know how to respond to that, so she focused on the potatoes, mashing them with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "Be careful with your heart, girl," Mrs. Sullivan said quietly. "August is a good man, but he carries burdens you know nothing about." "We all have burdens," Victoria replied, equally soft. "Some are just better hidden than others." Mrs. Sullivan nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Just so long as you know what you're about." The truth was, Victoria didn't know what she was about, especially when it came to August Yancy. She only knew that for the first time since arriving in the territory, she felt something other than fear and loss. Something that felt dangerously like hope. That evening, after dinner had been cleared and the boarders had retired to their rooms or gone out for the night, August invited Victoria to join him on the porch. The air was cool but pleasant, the sky ablaze with more stars than she had ever seen in Boston. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Victoria in the porch swing and August leaning against the railing, smoking a cigarette. "Mrs. Sullivan tells me you've been a godsend around here," he finally said. "Says she doesn't know how she managed without you." Victoria smiled. "She's being generous. I'm still learning my way around a kitchen. Still, seems like you're settling in well enough." She nodded. "Better than I could have hoped." August studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You ever going to tell me what you're running from, Victoria?" The use of her first name the first time he'd used it caught her off guard almost as much as the question. She looked away, focusing on the distant silhouette of mountains against the night sky. "Does it matter?" she finally asked. "Might," he replied. "Depends on whether it's likely to follow you here." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What makes you think someone's following me?" August took a final drag of his cigarette before crushing it under his boot. "Just a feeling. Been noticing some strangers in town." Asking questions. Her heart began to race. What kind of questions? About newcomers. Specifically, a young woman traveling alone. Victoria rose abruptly from the swing. "I should go inside." August caught her arm gently as she tried to pass. "Victoria." His voice was low, urgent. "I can't help if I don't know what I'm dealing with." She looked up at him, torn between the need for secrecy and the desperate desire to unburden herself to someone who might understand. In the end, fear won out. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Yancy," she said formally, pulling away from his touch. "But my problems are my own to bear." As she turned to go inside, August spoke again. "Everyone needs someone to stand with them, Victoria, even you." She paused at the door, not looking back. "Good night, Mr. Yancy." Inside, Victoria leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She had begun to feel safe in Glenrio, to believe that perhaps she had outrun the nightmare that had consumed her father. August's words shattered that fragile sense of security. If men were asking about her, it could only mean one thing. Edmund Blackwell and his associates had tracked her this far. The thought made her physically ill. Blackwell, her father's former business partner, had orchestrated everything, the accusations of embezzlement that had driven them from Boston, the relentless pursuit across the country, and finally, the brutal attack on their homestead that had left her father dead and Victoria fleeing for her life. And they were still looking for her, because they believed she had what they wanted: her father's ledger, containing proof of Blackwell's illegal dealings and the names of his powerful accomplices. The ledger she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. She had been a fool to think she could escape, to think she could build a new life here. Sooner or later, Blackwell's men would find her, and when they did, they wouldn't care who got hurt in the process. August Yancy had been kind to her, kinder than anyone had a right to expect from a stranger. Mrs. Sullivan had given her shelter and purpose. The thought of bringing danger to their doorstep was unbearable. She would have to leave Glenrio tonight. Victoria waited until the house was silent, then packed her meager belongings in the carpet bag Mrs. Sullivan had given her. The ledger she wrapped carefully in a shawl, tucking it at the bottom of the bag. She dressed in her sturdiest clothes, the plain skirt and blouse she had arrived in, now mended and clean, and pulled on the boots August had purchased for her last week, claiming they were payment for her work. She wrote a brief note to Mrs. Sullivan, apologizing for her abrupt departure and leaving what little money she had earned as payment for her room. Then she crept downstairs, careful to avoid the steps that creaked. The front door opened just as Victoria reached for the handle, startling her so badly she nearly cried out. August stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Victoria clutched her carpetbag tightly. "How did you know?" "I didn't," he admitted. "But I suspected you might run. It's what I would do in your position." "Then you understand why I have to leave." August shook his head. "Running won't solve anything. Believe me, I've tried it." Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You don't understand. These men, they killed my father. They'll kill anyone who gets in their way." "Then let me help you," he urged, moving closer. "You don't have to face this alone." "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You barely know me." August was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. "Because in the short time I've known you, Victoria Dawson, you've reminded me that there are still things in this world worth fighting for." The simple honesty of his words broke something inside her. The careful walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. "I'm scared," she whispered, admitting what she had been unable to acknowledge even to herself. "I know," he replied, reaching out slowly to take her hand. "But fear doesn't have to define you." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In the dim light of the entrance hall, his eyes were shadowed, but she could still see the determination in them and something else, something that made her breath catch. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I put everyone here at risk. If you run," he countered, "you'll be alone. And they'll still come looking." He paused. "Tell me about them, Victoria. Tell me what we're facing." Victoria hesitated, torn between the habit of secrecy and the desperate need for an ally. Finally, she nodded. "Not here. Someone might hear." August considered this, then made a decision. "My house is on the edge of town. We can talk there, and you can decide what to do after." It was improper, scandalous even, for an unmarried woman to visit a man's home alone at night, but propriety seemed a hollow concern when faced with the very real threat to her life. Victoria nodded. "Let me get my coat," August said, releasing her hand. "Wait here." When he returned moments later, he was carrying not only his coat but a rifle as well. Victoria's eyes widened at the sight of the weapon. "Just a precaution," he assured her, seeing her expression. "Come on, my horse is out back." The ride to August's home was tense and silent. Victoria sat behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. Despite the circumstances, she found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of him against the cool night air. August's house was larger than she had expected, a proper ranch house built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A bunkhouse stood some distance away, and several outbuildings were scattered across the property. "You live here alone?" Victoria asked as he helped her dismount. "I have ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse," he explained, securing his horse. "But the main house is just me." Inside, August lit several lamps, illuminating a surprisingly comfortable living space. The main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace, with bookshelves covering one wall and practical but well-made furniture arranged for conversation. It was not what Victoria had expected from a bachelor's quarters in the frontier. August gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "Have a seat. I'll get a fire going." As he busied himself with the fire, Victoria looked around, noticing details that spoke volumes about the man, the well-worn books on the shelves, the quality of the furnishings, the neat organization of the space. This was the home of someone who valued comfort and permanence, not a drifter or a typical frontier opportunist. Once the fire was crackling, August retrieved a bottle and 2 glasses from a cabinet. "Whiskey," he said, offering her a glass. "You look like you could use it." Victoria rarely drank spirits, but she accepted the glass, taking a small sip. The liquor burned her throat, but the warmth that followed was not unpleasant. August sat across from her, his own glass cradled in his hands. "Now," he said quietly, "tell me," and so she did. She told him about her father, Jonathan Dawson, a respected banker in Boston, whose partner, Edmund Blackwell, had been using the bank to launder money for a criminal organization, with connections reaching into the highest levels of society. She told him how her father had discovered the scheme and collected evidence, how Blackwell had retaliated by framing Jonathan for embezzlement, forcing them to flee west. "Father thought we would be safe in New Mexico," Victoria said, staring into the fire. "He bought land, planned to start over as a rancher, but they found us. 3 men came to our homestead 6 weeks ago. They wanted the ledger father's proof of Blackwell's crimes." Her voice faltered. "When he wouldn't tell them where it was, they shot him. They set fire to the house with his body inside. I was in the stable when they arrived. I hid, then escaped with the ledger and what little I could salvage." August's expression had darkened as she spoke. "And you've been running ever since?" Victoria nodded. "Until I reached Glenrio." "Until you found me." "The ledger," August said. "You still have it." "It's all I have left," she replied. "The only proof that my father wasn't a criminal, that he was trying to do the right thing." August was quiet for a long moment, considering. "These men who are asking questions in town, would you recognize them? Are they the same ones who killed your father?" Victoria shook her head. "I don't know, I never saw their faces clearly, but Blackwell has connections everywhere. He could have sent anyone." "What does the ledger look like?" "Would they recognize it if they saw it?" "It's a simple black book with the bank's name embossed on the cover," Victoria explained. "But it's what's inside that matters: names, dates, amounts, evidence of years of criminal activity." August leaned forward, his expression intense. "Victoria, have you considered that this ledger might be your protection, not just your burden? If it contains what you say it does, it implicates powerful people. That makes it valuable and potentially dangerous to those named in it." "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting we use it," August replied. "Not just to clear your father's name, but to end this threat permanently." Victoria stared at him. "How?" "There's a federal marshal in Santa Fe, Thomas Harrington. He's honest, incorruptible. If we can get the ledger to him, he could take it from there." "Santa Fe is days away," Victoria pointed out. "And if Blackwell's men are already in Glenrio, then we need to draw them out," August said decisively. "On our terms, not theirs." The plan August outlined was both simple and audacious. They would let it be known that Victoria was staying at his ranch, protected. The rumor of the ledger would be allowed to spread. When Blackwell's men made their move, as they inevitably would, August and his most trusted ranch hands would be ready. "It's risky," Victoria said when he had finished explaining. "For you most of all." August shrugged. "Risk is part of life out here." "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her since the night he'd found her outside the Promise. August set down his glass, his expression grave. "Because 7 years ago, I was engaged to be married to a woman named Alice. Her father was a judge in Philadelphia who uncovered corruption in the city's government. When he refused to be bought, they killed him, made it look like a robbery gone wrong." His voice grew strained. Alice was determined to see justice done. She had letters, documents that proved who was behind it. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine, already anticipating where his story was heading. "I told her to let it go," August continued, his gaze fixed on the fire. "To run away with me, start fresh somewhere else. But she was stubborn, believed in justice more than her own safety." He paused. "They killed her too, left her body in the street as a warning to others." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "August, I'm so sorry." "I should have protected her," he said, the raw pain in his voice making her heart ache. "Should have stood with her instead of asking her to run. That's why I left the East, came out here. Thought I could outrun the guilt." He looked up at Victoria, his eyes haunted. "I was wrong. Some things follow you no matter how far you go." In that moment, Victoria understood the connection that had formed between them from the first. They were both survivors of the same kind of evil, both carrying wounds that went beyond the physical. "You see yourself in her," Victoria said softly. "In Alice." August nodded. "In some ways. But you're different too. You survived where she didn't. You've been running, yes, but you kept the evidence, kept fighting in your own way." Victoria set down her glass and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "I'm not Alice," she said firmly. "And what happened to her wasn't your fault." "I know that," he replied, though his voice suggested otherwise. "In my head, at least." Victoria squeezed his hands. "We can't change the past, August, but maybe together we can face what comes next." The look he gave her then was so full of emotion, grief, and hope, and something warmer, more personal, that Victoria felt her breath catch. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against the roughness of his jaw. August caught her wrist, his grip careful but firm. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough, "I'm not a good man." "Yes," she contradicted him softly. "You are." For a long moment they remained like that, suspended in a moment of possibility. Then August released her wrist, standing abruptly. "It's late. You should rest. You can take my room, I'll sleep out here." Victoria recognized the retreat for what it was, not rejection, but fear. Fear of hoping, of letting someone matter again after losing so much. She understood it because she felt it too. "All right," she said, rising to her feet. "But August." She waited until he looked at her. "Thank you for everything," he nodded, his expression softening slightly. "We'll figure this out, Victoria, I promise you that." As she followed him to his bedroom, Victoria realized that for the first time since her father's death, she truly believed that might be possible. With August Yancy standing beside her, perhaps she had a fighting chance after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the New Mexico sun casting long shadows across the landscape as Victoria woke in August's bed. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings causing a spike of panic, until she remembered the events of the previous night. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, running her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to tame it before venturing out to find August. The main room was empty, but she could smell coffee and followed the scent to the kitchen at the back of the house. August stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a cast-iron skillet. He had already dressed for the day, though his feet were bare on the wooden floor. The domesticity of the scene made Victoria's heart twist in a way that surprised her. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. August turned, a small smile touching his lips as he saw her. "Morning, sleep all right, better than I expected," she admitted, moving further into the kitchen. "Can I help with anything?" He gestured to the skillet. "Just making some breakfast. Coffee's ready if you want some." Victoria poured herself a cup from the pot on the stove, cradling it in both hands as she leaned against the counter, watching August cook. There was an ease to his movements that spoke of long practice. "I didn't take you for a cook," she remarked. August shrugged. "Man living alone learns to fend for himself, or he eats poorly." As they sat down to a simple but hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Victoria found herself studying August with new eyes. Knowing his past, understanding the burden he carried, made his kindness toward her all the more meaningful. "I've been thinking about your plan," she said as they ate. "It's risky, but I don't see a better option. The longer I stay in one place, the more danger I bring to everyone around me." August nodded. "We'll need to move quickly. If Blackwell's men are already in town asking questions, it won't be long before they connect you to me or Mrs. Sullivan." "What about Mrs. Sullivan?" Victoria asked, concern evident in her voice. "I left a note, but she'll be worried." "I'll send one of my men to explain," August assured her. "Martha Sullivan is tougher than she looks, and discreet. She won't betray your whereabouts." After breakfast, August showed Victoria around the ranch, the main house, the bunkhouse where his 5 ranch hands lived, the barn and corrals, and the small garden that provided fresh vegetables during the growing season. It was a modest operation by some standards, but impressively self-sufficient. "You've built something real here," Victoria observed as they walked back toward the house. "Something permanent." August glanced at her. "Wasn't planning to stay at first, just passing through looking for some place to start over, but the land has a way of getting under your skin." Victoria understood what he meant. Despite the harshness of the territory, there was a raw beauty to it that called to something deep within her. The vast open spaces, the dramatic landscapes, the sense of possibility that seemed to stretch as far as the horizon. "What will happen after?" she asked quietly. "If we succeed, if we get the ledger to Marshal Harrington and he acts on it." August was silent for a moment. "That depends on you," he finally said. "What do you want, Victoria?" It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider since her father's murder. Survival had been her only goal, her only thought. Now, standing beside August in the clear morning light, she found herself daring to think beyond mere survival. "Peace," she said softly. "A place where I don't have to look over my shoulder, a life that's my own again." August nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll fight for." Later that morning, August called a meeting with his ranch hands, 5 men ranging in age from barely 20 to well past 50, all with the weathered look of those who had lived hard lives on the frontier. Victoria stood nervously beside August as he explained the situation, deliberately omitting certain details, but making it clear that she was in danger and needed their help. To her surprise, there was no hesitation from any of them. They simply nodded, asked practical questions about what would be expected of them, and offered suggestions on securing the ranch against potential intruders. "Why would they help me?" Victoria asked August afterward, as the men dispersed to begin preparations. "They don't even know me." August's expression was thoughtful. "Out here, loyalty counts for something. These men know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." He paused. "And maybe they recognize something in you worth fighting for." The words warmed her, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "I still feel like I'm putting everyone in danger unnecessarily." "The danger was already there," August reminded her. "From the moment Blackwell's men killed your father. The difference now is that you're not facing it alone." The rest of the day was spent in preparation. August sent his youngest hand, a quick-witted boy named Sam, into town with messages for Mrs. Sullivan and a few trusted contacts who who would help spread the word that Victoria Dawson was staying at the Yancy Ranch, information that would inevitably reach Blackwell's men. Meanwhile, Victoria retrieved the ledger from Mrs. Sullivan's, carefully wrapped and hidden in August's saddlebag. When she handed it to August back at the ranch, she felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. The book represented both her greatest burden and her only hope for justice. August examined it briefly before locking it in a hidden safe behind a painting in his study. "It stays here until we're ready to move," he explained. "If anything happens to me, Carter knows how to open the safe. He'll get it to Marshal Harrington." Victoria didn't like the casual way August referred to the possibility of his death. "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said firmly. August gave her a small, sad smile. "Hope you're right, but it's best to be prepared." As evening approached, the ranch took on the appearance of a fortress preparing for siege. The hands took up positions around the property, armed and vigilant. August insisted that Victoria remain in the house, away from windows, while he coordinated their defenses. The waiting was excruciating. Every sound made Victoria jump. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat. By midnight, when nothing had happened, the tension was almost unbearable. August found her in the kitchen, staring out the window at the moonlit yard. "You should try to rest," he said softly. Victoria shook her head. "I couldn't sleep even if I tried." He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "They might not come tonight. They'll want to gather information first, assess the situation." "Or they are already watching, waiting for the right moment," Victoria countered. August couldn't argue with that possibility. Instead, he reached out, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Victoria turned to look at him, her heart pounding at the intensity in his gaze. "August," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that if these might be their last hours of peace, there were things that needed to be spoken. Before she could continue, a shout came from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. August's expression hardened instantly, his hand dropping hers as he reached for his revolver. "Stay here," he ordered, "away from the windows." But Victoria had no intention of cowering while others fought her battles. "I'm coming with you," she said, retrieving the small pistol August had given her earlier. "This is my fight too." August looked like he wanted to argue but must have recognized the determination in her eyes. He nodded once, then moved toward the door, Victoria close behind. Outside, chaos had erupted. 3 riders had approached from the south, firing as they came. August's men had taken cover and were returning fire, the muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness in brief, violent bursts. August pulled Victoria behind the cover of a water trough. "Those are Blackwell's men," she whispered, recognizing one of the riders as one of the men who had killed her father. "They are outnumbered," August observed. "Must be desperate." Just then, one of the attackers shouted, "Dawson, we know you're here. Give us the ledger and no one else has to die." August glanced at Victoria. "They want to draw us out." Victoria's grip tightened on her pistol. "What do we do?" Before August could answer, one of his hands the oldest, a man named Carter, moved from his position, drawing the attacker's fire. In that moment of distraction, 2 other ranch hands rushed the riders from the side, pulling one from his horse. A furious gunfight ensued. Victoria watched in horror as Carter fell, clutching his shoulder. August cursed, then turned to her. "I need to help them. Stay here." "August," she began, but he was already moving, crouched low, making his way toward the injured Carter. The next few minutes were a blur of gunfire and shouted commands. Victoria remained behind the water trough, her pistol ready, though she had no clear shot at any of the attackers. She watched as August dragged Carter to safety, then joined his men in pressing the advantage. One of the attackers was already down, possibly dead. Another was engaged in a desperate struggle with two of August's hands. The third had retreated to his horse and was preparing to flee when Victoria saw him turn, raising his rifle toward August's unprotected back. Without thinking, Victoria stood, aimed, and fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the man, causing his own shot to miss August by inches. August spun at the sound, saw the threat, and fired twice in rapid succession. The attacker fell from his horse, motionless. In the sudden silence that followed, Victoria found herself shaking, the pistol heavy in her hand. August approached her slowly, his expression a mixture of concern and something like admiration. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Victoria lowered the pistol, her voice unsteady. "I couldn't let him. I couldn't lose you too." August reached out, his hand cupping her cheek in a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "Victoria," he began. The moment was interrupted by one of his hands calling out, "Boss, this one's still alive." August's expression hardened as he turned away, moving toward the fallen attacker who was indeed still breathing, though clearly wounded. Victoria followed, her heart pounding. The man lay in the dirt, blood seeping from a wound in his side. As August and Victoria approached, he looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized her. "You," he wheezed. "Dawson's girl." Victoria felt a surge of anger. "You killed my father." The man coughed, blood staining his lips. "Just following orders, nothing personal." August knelt beside the wounded man, his voice cold. "Who sent you?" "Blackwell." The man hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Blackwell wants the ledger." "How many more of you are there?" August pressed. "Just us," the man replied, though his eyes shifted away, suggesting he was lying. Victoria stepped closer, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "You're dying," she said bluntly. "Your friends are dead or captured. The truth is all you have left to give." The man stared at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his pain-filled eyes. "Two more," he finally admitted. "In town, waiting for us to return." August nodded to his men, who moved to secure the prisoner and tend to his wounds enough to keep him alive until the law could deal with him. Then he turned to Victoria, taking her arm and leading her a short distance away. "We need to move," he said urgently. "If there are two more in town, they'll come looking when these three don't return." Victoria nodded, her mind racing. "The ledger, I'll get it," August assured her. "Pack whatever you need, we'll leave within the hour." As Victoria hurried to gather her few belongings, the reality of what had just occurred washed over her. Men had died tonight because of her, because of the ledger. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it was a steely determination. Her father had died protecting that ledger, believing that the truth it contained was worth his life. She would not dishonor his sacrifice by giving up now. When she returned to the main room, August was waiting, the ledger secured in a saddlebag along with provisions for the journey. His expression was grim but resolute. "Carter's wound isn't serious," he reported. "The others are unhurt. They'll keep watch here while we're gone." "Where are we going?" Victoria asked. "Santa Fe," August replied. "To Marshall Harrington. It's a 3-day ride if we push hard." He paused. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Victoria straightened her spine, meeting his gaze squarely. "I've been running for too long. It's time to finish this." August nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Then let's ride." They left the ranch under cover of darkness, taking a little used trail that led north through the foothills. August rode ahead, his rifle across his saddle, constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. Victoria followed on a sturdy mare, her body aching from the tension of the night's events but her mind clear and focused. As they crested a rise just before dawn, August reined in his horse, waiting for Victoria to catch up. Below them, Glenrio was just visible in the distance, the first faint light of morning turning the desert landscape into a tapestry of shadows and gold. "Once we're past the town, we'll be harder to track," August said. "The trail splits in several directions a few miles north." Victoria nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked softly. August turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the growing light. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." Something in his voice, in the certainty with which he spoke, gave Victoria courage. She reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "Then let's keep going." As they rode into the sunrise, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace despite the danger that still pursued them. Whatever happened in the days to come, she was no longer alone. And that, perhaps, made all the difference. The journey to Santa Fe was grueling. August set a punishing pace, pushing them and their horses to the limit as they traveled through the rugged New Mexico landscape. They avoided main trails and settlements, taking instead the more difficult routes that would make them harder to track. They spoke little during the day, focused on the task of covering as much ground as possible. At night, they made cold camps away from the trail, not risking a fire that might draw attention. It was during these quiet evenings that they talked, sharing stories and memories, building a connection that grew stronger with each passing day. On the second night, as they huddled beneath a shared blanket against the desert chill, August told Victoria more about his life before coming west, his privileged upbringing in Philadelphia, his education at Harvard, his plans to enter law and politics before Alice's murder changed everything. "I was so angry afterward," he admitted, his voice low in the darkness. "Wanted to kill the men responsible, almost did in fact." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, offering silent comfort. "What stopped you?" August was quiet for a moment. "Alice's mother," he finally said. "She said that if I became a killer, they would win twice over, taking not just Alice's life but my soul as well." "Wise woman," Victoria murmured. "Yes," August agreed. "Though it took me years to see it, I came west instead, thinking I could outrun the pain. Bought land, built the ranch, kept to myself." He paused. "Until the night I found you outside the Promise." Victoria turned to look at him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it, helping me?" August's hand found hers, his fingers lacing with hers. "Not for a moment," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, Victoria, know that." On the morning of the third day, they crested a ridge to see Santa Fe spread before them in the valley below. The territorial capital was larger and more developed than Glenrio, with adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza and the spire of San Miguel Chapel rising above the surrounding structures. "Marshal Harrington's office is near the courthouse," August said as they began their descent. "We should be able to reach it by midday." Victoria nodded, a mixture of hope and trepidation filling her. After weeks of running, after her father's murder and her own narrow escape, they were finally close to ending the threat that had consumed her life. But doubt still nagged at her. "What if it's not enough?" she asked, giving voice to her fears. "The ledger, I mean. What if Harrington can't or won't act on it?" August's expression was determined. "Then we find another way. But Harrington is a good man, Victoria. He'll do what's right." They entered Santa Fe shortly before noon, the streets busy with merchants, locals, and the occasional government official. August led them directly to the marshal's office, a modest adobe building near the plaza. He insisted that Victoria wait outside with the horses while he went in first, wanting to assess the situation before revealing her presence. Victoria watched anxiously as August disappeared inside, her hand resting on the saddlebag containing the ledger. Every person who passed seemed a potential threat, every shadow a place where Blackwell's men might be lurking. The minutes stretched endlessly as she waited, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, August emerged with another man, tall, silver-haired, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades upholding the law in a lawless land. "Victoria," August called, gesturing for her to join them. "This is Marshal Harrington. He's agreed to hear us out." Marshal Harrington's office was sparse but orderly, with wanted posters covering one wall and maps of the territory spread across a large desk. The marshal himself sat behind this desk, his keen eyes watching as Victoria removed the ledger from the saddlebag and placed it before him. "Mr. Yancy tells me this contains evidence of criminal activity involving some prominent citizens back east," Harrington said, his voice deep and measured. "Including a man named Edmund Blackwell, who you claim orchestrated your father's murder." Victoria nodded. "My father was Jonathan Dawson, a banker in Boston. He discovered that Blackwell and others were using the bank to launder money for a criminal organization. This ledger contains all the details, names, dates, amounts." Harrington opened the book, flipping through pages of meticulous notations in Jonathan Dawson's neat handwriting. His expression remained impassive, but Victoria saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at the scope of what the ledger revealed. "These are serious allegations," he finally said, looking up at Victoria, "involving powerful people." "My father died protecting that information," Victoria replied, her voice steady, "because he believed the truth mattered more than his own safety, more than our safety." Harrington's gaze shifted to August, who stood beside Victoria, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor. "And you, Yancy? What's your stake in this?" August straightened slightly. "Justice," he said simply, "for Victoria, for her father, for others who have been hurt by men like Blackwell." The marshal studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the ledger, placing his hand flat on its cover. "I'll need time to review this thoroughly, and I'll need your full statement, Miss Dawson, everything you know about Blackwell, about your father's discovery, about the attack on your homestead." Victoria felt a surge of hope. "You believe me?" Harrington's expression softened slightly. "I've been a lawman for 30 years, Miss Dawson. I've learned to recognize truth when I hear it." He paused. "But I've also learned that justice isn't always swift or simple, especially when it involves the rich and powerful." "We understand that," August said. "But Victoria deserves to live without looking over her shoulder, and Blackwell deserves to answer for what he's done." Harrington nodded. "Yes to both, but it will take time." He looked at Victoria. "Are you prepared for that, for what might be a lengthy process?" Victoria straightened her spine. "I've come this far, Marshal. I won't turn back now." The next several days were exhausting. Victoria gave her statement to Marshal Harrington, recounting every detail she could remember about her father's discovery, Blackwell's threats, their flight west, and the final, fatal attack on their homestead. Harrington took copious notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly listening with grave attention. August remained by her side throughout, offering support when her voice faltered and filling in details about the attack at his ranch. His steady presence gave her strength, helping her through the painful process of reliving the worst moments of her life. Harrington arranged for them to stay at a small hotel near his office, posting deputies nearby for protection. "Blackwell's reach is long," he explained, "and we don't know how many men he has in the territory." On the fourth day, as Victoria and August were returning to the hotel after another session with Harrington, a messenger arrived with an urgent telegram for the marshal. Harrington read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" August asked, immediately alert to the change in the marshal's demeanor. Harrington handed him the telegram. From the sheriff in Glenrio. 2 men matching the description of Blackwell's associates were found dead in their hotel room, throats cut. Victoria gasped. "The 2 who were waiting in town." "Looks that way," Harrington agreed. "But they weren't killed by any lawman. This was professional clean." August's expression was grim. Blackwell tying up loose ends, making sure they couldn't talk if they were caught. Victoria felt a chill run through her. "Then he knows. He knows we have the ledger, that we've brought it to you." Harrington nodded soberly. "Likely so, which means we need to move more quickly than I'd planned." He turned to August. "I have a judge who can issue federal warrants based on what's in the ledger. He'll be here tomorrow. Once those warrants are issued, I can telegraph the authorities in Boston." "And until then?" Victoria asked. "Until then, you stay close, stay vigilant," Harrington replied. "Blackwell's not the type to give up easily." That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She paced the small hotel room, thinking about the men in Glenrio, about how casually Blackwell disposed of those who failed him. It reinforced what she already knew, that the man would stop at nothing to retrieve the ledger and silence her permanently. A soft knock at her door startled her. Hand on her pistol, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "It's me," came August's voice. Victoria unlocked the door, relief washing over her as he stepped inside. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. August shook his head. "Too much on my mind." He moved to the window, peering out at the darkened street below. "Harrington's men are still in position, but I'd feel better if we were somewhere more defensible." Victoria joined him at the window. "You think Blackwell might try something here, in the territorial capital?" "I think a man who would kill his own associates to keep them quiet wouldn't hesitate to strike anywhere," August replied grimly. "Even Santa Fe." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the night. "I'm tired of being afraid, August. Tired of running, of looking over my shoulder." August turned to her, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly, "and I promise you it will end, one way or another." "That's what I'm afraid of," Victoria admitted. "The another part, what if Blackwell wins? What if all of this, my father's death, our journey here, what if it's for nothing?" August reached out, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. "It won't be for nothing," he said firmly. "Even if the worst happens, you've already won a victory, Victoria. You've stood up to him. You've chosen to fight rather than submit. That matters." Victoria looked up at him, struck by the conviction in his voice, the certainty in his eyes. In that moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on this man, to trust him, to love him. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a strange, calm resolve. Whatever happened in the days to come, she would face it with August beside her, and that gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. "August," she began, her voice soft but steady, "if we survive this—" He waited, his gaze never leaving hers. "If we survive this," Victoria continued, "I don't want to go back east. I want to stay here in the territory, with you if you'll have me." For a moment, August seemed stunned by her words. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features, making him look younger, unburdened. "Victoria Dawson," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there is nothing in this world I want more than that." Before she could respond, he pulled her closer, one hand moving to cup her face. "I love you," he said simply. "Have from the moment I found you outside that damn saloon, looking like you'd been through hell but still standing tall." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. When August kissed her, It felt like coming home, like finding something she hadn't realized she was missing until that moment. His lips were gentle at first, almost reverent, then more insistent as she responded with equal fervor. His arms encircled her, holding her as if she were something precious, something he feared might slip away if he didn't hold tight enough. When they finally parted, both breathless, August rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he promised, "we'll build a life together. A good life." Victoria smiled, for the first time allowing herself to truly believe in a future beyond the fear and running. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." The moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass from the street below, followed by shouts and the unmistakable report of gunfire. August reacted instantly, pulling Victoria away from the window just as a bullet splintered the wooden frame where they had been standing. "Get down," he ordered, reaching for his pistol as he moved to the door. "Stay away from the windows." Victoria scrambled for her own weapon, heart pounding as more shots rang out below. "What's happening?" August eased the door open a crack, peering into the hallway. "Not sure, but I'm betting Blackwell's men have found us." He turned back to Victoria, his expression grim. "We need to get to Harrington. Can you make it downstairs?" Victoria nodded, steeling herself. "Yes, stay behind me," August instructed, "and be ready to shoot if necessary." They moved into the hallway, August leading the way toward the stairs. The sounds of struggle continued outside, punctuated by occasional gunfire. As they reached the landing, they could see one of Harrington's deputies lying at the bottom of the stairs, motionless. August cursed under his breath. "Back door," he whispered, changing direction. "Through the kitchen." They made their way carefully through the darkened hotel, the sounds of conflict receding slightly as they moved away from the main entrance. The kitchen was deserted, the back door standing slightly ajar. August paused, holding up a hand to signal Victoria to wait. He approached the door cautiously, pistol raised, then pushed it open wider with the toe of his boot. The alley behind the hotel appeared empty, shrouded in shadows. August gestured for Victoria to follow him, his eyes constantly scanning for threats as they emerged into the night air. "Marshall's office is 3 blocks that way," he murmured, nodding toward the end of the alley. "Stay close to the buildings. Use any cover you can find." They moved quickly but carefully, the sounds of conflict at the hotel growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and the attack. The streets of Santa Fe were eerily deserted, most citizens having the good sense to stay inside when gunfire erupted in the night. They were halfway to Harrington's office when a figure stepped out of a cross street directly in their path. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, Victoria recognized him immediately: Edmund Blackwell, her father's former partner, the man who had ordered his murder. "Miss Dawson," Blackwell said pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a social function rather than a darkened street in the middle of an attack. "How fortunate to find you." August moved slightly, positioning himself between Victoria and Blackwell. "Step aside," he ordered, his pistol aimed steadily at the other man's chest. Blackwell seemed unperturbed by the weapon. "I think not, Mr. Yancy. You see, Miss Dawson has something that belongs to me. I've come a very long way to retrieve it." "The ledger isn't here," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Marshall Harrington has it. It's over, Blackwell." For the first time, Blackwell's composed expression faltered slightly. "You're lying," he said, though doubt had crept into his voice. "She's not," August replied coldly. "Federal warrants are being issued as we speak. For you, for your associates, for everyone named in that ledger. It's finished." Blackwell's hand moved toward his coat, but August was faster. "Don't," he warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Give me a reason, Blackwell, please." For a long, tense moment, The three of them stood frozen in tableau, August with his pistol trained on Blackwell, Victoria slightly behind him, and Blackwell himself, his hand hovering near what was undoubtedly a concealed weapon. Then, with a movement so swift it was almost a blur, Blackwell drew a small derringer from his coat pocket. August fired without hesitation, the sound of his pistol deafening in the confined space of the street. Blackwell staggered backward, the derringer falling from his grasp unfired. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his expensive coat, then back up at August and Victoria, his expression one of almost comical surprise. "You actually shot me," he said, sounding more indignant than pained. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed to the cobblestones. August approached cautiously, kicking the derringer well out of reach before kneeling to check Blackwell's condition. "He's alive," he reported grimly, "but he needs a doctor." Victoria stared down at the man who had destroyed her family, who had pursued her across half the country. She felt no satisfaction in his wounded state, only a hollow sense of completion, as if a chapter in her life, a dark and painful chapter, was finally coming to a close. "We need to get him to Harrington," she said quietly. August nodded, tearing a strip from Blackwell's coat to bind the wound before hauling the man to his feet. Blackwell groaned in pain but was conscious enough to walk with August's support. They reached the marshal's office to find it in a state of organized chaos. Deputies were coming and going. Reports were being shouted across the room, and Marshal Harrington himself stood in the center of it all, issuing orders in a calm, authoritative voice. He turned as they entered, his eyes widening at the sight of Blackwell supported between them. "Well," he said dryly, "looks like you've saved us the trouble of hunting him down." "He tried to ambush us near the hotel," August explained, passing the wounded man to two deputies. "Get him to a doctor," he instructed, "but keep him under guard. He's not to be left alone for any reason." Harrington gestured for them to follow him into his private office, away from the commotion in the main room. "The attack at the hotel was a diversion," he explained once they were seated. "Meant to draw our attention while Blackwell went after you personally. Did any of your men—" Victoria began, unable to finish the question. "Two wounded, one seriously," Harrington replied grimly. "But they'll live. We captured 3 of the attackers, killed one." He paused. "Judge Harlow arrived an hour ago. He's reviewing the ledger now. With Blackwell in custody and the evidence you've provided, I'd say we have a solid case." Victoria felt a wave of relief so intense it left her lightheaded. "Then it's really over," Harrington nodded. "For the most part, there will still be a trial and you'll need to testify. But with Blackwell himself in custody and the ledger as evidence, I'd say justice has a fighting chance." August took Victoria's hand, squeezing it gently. "What about Victoria's safety? Blackwell has allies, connections. She'll remain under protection until the trial," Harrington assured them. "After that? Well, I suspect many of those connections will distance themselves rather quickly once they realize which way the wind is blowing." Victoria looked at August, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "And after the trial, what then?" August's eyes met hers, warm with promise. "After that, we start building that life we talked about, if you still want to." "I do," she said softly. "More than anything." 6 months later, Victoria stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as August worked with a new colt in the corral. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, turning the distant mountains into silhouettes against the darkening sky. So much had changed since that rainy night in Glenrio, when she had stumbled into August Yancy's life. Edmund Blackwell had been tried and convicted, along with several of his associates. The ledger had provided evidence that led to investigations and indictments reaching into the highest levels of Boston society. Victoria's father's name had been cleared, his reputation restored posthumously. And Victoria herself had found a new home, a new purpose, a new love. She and August had married 3 months after Blackwell's capture, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Glenrio with Mrs. Sullivan and August's ranch hands as witnesses. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Victoria's education and business acumen complemented August's practical knowledge and experience. Together, they had expanded operations, adding more cattle, improving the quality of their stock, and investing in the future. But more importantly, they had built a life together, one filled with love, respect, and the kind of partnership that neither had thought possible before they found each other. August finished working with the colt and made his way to the porch, removing his hat as he approached Victoria. Despite the months of hard work and exposure to the elements, he looked younger somehow, the haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes now replaced by contentment. "How's our new addition coming along?" Victoria asked, nodding toward the corral. August smiled, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. "Spirited, but he's learning. Reminds me of someone else I know." Victoria laughed, leaning against him as his arm encircled her waist. "I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. Yancy." "As it was intended, Mrs. Yancy," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Storm coming," August observed, glancing at the gathering clouds to the west. Victoria nodded, thinking of that first night in Glenrio, standing in the rain, filthy and desperate, and August's words that had marked the beginning of everything. "Then let the rain and me wash you clean." "Let it come," she said softly, turning in his arms to face him. "I'm not afraid of a little rain." August's expression softened as he gazed down at her, understanding the reference. "No," he agreed, his voice tender, "you never were afraid of the things that mattered." As the first drops of rain began to fall, August drew Victoria closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built on truth, on justice, on love that had emerged from the darkest of circumstances. And as the rain washed over the land, cleansing and renewing, Victoria Dawson Yancy knew that she had found what she had sought since the night of her father's murder: not just safety, not just justice, but a place to belong, a person to love, a life that was truly her own. The rain fell harder, but they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching as the parched earth drank deeply of the life-giving water. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. The ranch would continue to grow. Their life together would deepen and strengthen. And perhaps, someday soon, they would welcome children into that life, sons and daughters who would grow up knowing the value of courage, of perseverance, of standing for what was right even when it seemed impossible. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to stand together in the rain, clean of the past, embracing the present, looking toward a future as vast and promising as the New Mexico sky. "I love you, Victoria," August murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." Victoria smiled, her heart full. "And I love you, August Yancy, yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." As the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean around them, Victoria knew that she had found not just a home or a husband, but something far more precious, a love that had healed them both, a love born in the wild heart of the frontier, a love that, like the land itself, would endure.